Respected members of the audience, we will now commence with our last session for the day, which is a special forum on economic security. I request the moderator for this session, Dr. Anil Salman, Chair Economic Security at IPRI, to please take his seat on the stage. I would now like to invite the speakers for this session, Mr. Haroon Akhtar Khan, Special Assistant to Prime Minister for Industries and Production Division, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, former Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, Dr. Stefan Durkin, Professor of Economic Policy, University of Oxford, and Mr. Zafar Masood, President and CEO, Bank of Punjab, to kindly take their seats on the stage. Dr. Anil Salman holds the OGTCL IPRI Chair of Economic Security at the Islamabad Policy Research Institute and holds a PhD from Rensselaer Institute, USA. He is also the chair for Pakistan's National Artificial Intelligence Policy Committee. As a dynamic academician, his impactful work has shaped strategic planning across various sectors. Internationally, Dr. Salman has been affiliated with several prestigious institutions, including Harvard and Cambridge University. Beyond academia, he serves as a master trainer, sharing his expertise with bureaucrats, law enforcement agencies, and other key stakeholders. Sir, the floor is yours for session's proceedings.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome you to the last panel. In David Copperfield, the great Charles Dickens tells the story of a young man who endures hardship after hardship, yet keeps learning, adapting, and rebuilding his life. I often think that's not so different from how nations are facing today's trade turbulence. Markets shifting, alliances changing, and still countries must find a way to adapt and grow. As global competition intensifies, nations are learning, as Dickens' characters did, that production, principles, and profit are intertwined, and that the real challenge is not choosing one or the other, but learning how to find a fair balance. In this spirit, our panel today explores how regions like South and Central Asia can traverse this new industrial mortality, where connectivity, competition, and co-science can coexist. It is my privilege to introduce the protagonists of today's August panel. His Excellency Haroon Akhtar Khan Sahab, Special Assistant to Prime Minister for Industries and Production. Zafar Masood Sahab, banker, entrepreneur, philanthropist, patron of arts, and currently President and CEO of Bank of Punjab with over 30 years of leadership in domestic and international banking. Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, former Governor of State Bank of Pakistan and Under Secretary General of the United Nations. Thank you, Madam, for joining us. And last but not the least, Professor Stefan Durkin, a British economist serving as Professor of Economic Policy at Oxford University and former Chief Economist at UK Department for International Development. We'll formally begin our session by inviting Mr. Haroon Akhtar Sahab with this query that Pakistan's industries are struggling with high energy costs, heavy taxation, and tight credit, all of which are eroding competitiveness. You have talked about lowering these costs to revive industry, but in an economy under fiscal stress where will the relief realistically come from? And what's the first reform you would prioritize to make Pakistan's products competitive again? Sir.
Ji, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be sitting with well-renowned people. I've worked with all three of them, and the question you have asked has been thoroughly debated with each one of them, with Honorable State Bank Governor, Madam Shamshad. That happened many years back, but with Zafar Masood Saab and Stephen Durkon, it has happened more recently. In fact, Stephen Durkon has been quite instrumental in my policy, and he supported me in the policy after a few discussions, and I'm very grateful to him on that. Coming to your question, you know, that is what Pakistan is going through and is right now a subject of debates all over. But at the outset, let me tell you that many countries have gone through such situations and have come out of it and done even better than before. So Pakistan right now is in a stage where your cost advantages, which were there a few years ago, have turned into cost disadvantages. And I always say that it is not only for our exporters, but also for our industry, which caters for the domestic consumption. So the million-dollar question is that with these impediments and these cost advantages, how do we produce cheaper goods, and how do we remain competitive with the rest of the world? And especially now that we have a new tariff policy in which very rightly reduces the tariffs across the board over the next 4 to 5 years, eliminates regulatory duties and additional custom duties, then how does the industry, which is facing these higher costs, how does the industry compete with the rest of the world, which will have a maximum tariff of 15%? And the answer is not easy. It's never been easy. This country has to grow. There is no way that with a population growth of 2.5%, one of the highest in the world, population of 250 million people, a growing bulge of the youth population, over 65% under the age of 30. It's important because all they need employment, they need jobs. That in this environment, we grow only at 2 to 3%. It cannot remain like that. So we've got to cross this 3 to 4% growth figure, reach a 5, 6, and 7%, and sustain it. And we've done it in the past. The only problem is that we've not been able to sustain this growth. Pakistan has to grow for over 7% continuously for at least a decade for us to start our way to become a developed country from a developing country. We've got to do that, and many countries have gone through that. But what is the problem? The problem is, how much time do we have to answer this? How much? 3 minutes. I think I've already gone through 2 minutes. Our number one problem is our trade deficit. It starts with the trade deficit. It's diluted by the foreign remittances, but we do not have enough foreign investment, foreign direct investment, and that results into a current account deficit, and that impedes any growth. And that once we grow beyond 4, 5, 6%, we end up in a problem where we have to go to the multilateral institutions for help. I personally think Pakistan is a rich country. We are not a poor country. And I do not think that something which is widely said that Pakistan was about to go broke. Pakistan will never go broke. Yes, the inflation will go up, we will print our rupee, but where we become poor is our foreign exchange reserves. We've got to handle that. All the countries which progressed in the recent decades, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, have first developed their reserves massively so that they are not dependent on the outside world to make them borrow from the outside world and then get their hands tied, because then you cannot have your own indigenous plan. So that's the problem. So the bottom line is, my time is limited in this first question, the bottom line is that we've got to bend backwards to increase our exports. We've got to do that. So the model we are looking at, the macroeconomic model, is Pakistan has to be industrialized. Pakistan's industrial sector has gone down over the last 30 years from being 26% as a part of portion of GDP down to 18%. And large-scale manufacturing is going down, if you look at the last 3 years. And out of that 18%, the exports are only about 9 to 10%. So we've got to increase the manufacturing sector. I personally think that this has to go up to around 25, 26, 27% of your GDP. And out of that 25, 26, 27%, we've got to have an exports which are currently 9 to 10%. It has to start approaching 13 to 14%. That is when we will start reducing our trade deficit, and in a matter of 10 to 12 years, we can reach a position in which we do not get hit by a current account deficit. Now, the problem is the moment we go for that, right now, our country needs imports. We need imports to provide goods and commodities to our growing population. And after the free trade agreement with a number of countries, we cannot compete with some of the countries where we have a free trade agreement. So manufacturing has disappeared from Pakistan. So we have to have a balanced policy. That's my last statement. We have to have a balanced policy. I do not think that we can reach a sustainable growth of 6 to 7% with a fiscal deficit of 4%. I think we're a country where we can cross the 5% percentage for fiscal deficit, but we've got to give those enablers to our manufacturing sector, to our business sector, which will make them competitive. For that, we have to make the energy prices competitive. We've got to bring the interest rates down. And above all, we've got to reduce our taxes. That's ruining our business. Like if our businessmen are shutting down their businesses and going elsewhere, how can we expect foreign investment to come into Pakistan with these things? The good thing is, my final statement is, the government realizes that there is a lot of talk, there is a lot of thinking process, there is a lot of brainstorming, and we are in the process of making a model in which we will have a balanced policy, which will take into account all these challenges, and then we'll come out of it towards a path of growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun sir, for a very candid picture about the Pakistan economy. Now I request Dr. Shamshad to share her views. Yes, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good evening to everybody. I'm not used to having sessions at 6 p.m., but there's always a first time. I was asked to speak on a specific topic. Maybe it's not fitting now, this panel, but I was asked to talk about how do we navigate, what are the challenges for the global power shift, the trade dynamics, trade war, and Pakistan's strategic opportunity. So distinguished guest, at the outset, let me congratulate IFPRI management and the team for structuring this timely conference on unfolding geopolitical and economic drama, the global power shift and trade war. These are not abstract concepts for textbooks. They are reshaping markets, supply chains, alliances, and the futures of nations like ours. Trade has always been more than commerce. It has been a reflection of power. Throughout history, the rules of global trade have mirrored the interest of the dominant nations. In the age of mercantilism, wealth was measured in gold and silver. When Britain led the world in the 19th century, free trade became the norm. After World War II, the United States promoted open markets and international cooperation. Trade norms don't emerge in a vacuum. They reflect who is setting the agenda. For decades, we have lived under the consensus of globalization. I worked in multilateral institutions, and everybody thought globalization is the way forward, and it has had phenomenal success. And as we lived under the consensus of globalization, it was anticipated that the nations would specialize, and they have, exchange freely, and trust that all boats would rise with the tide. However, today, the tide has shifted, fractured by technological leaps such as artificial intelligence, energy transitions, demographic changes, and geopolitical rivalries. The world is moving from open globalization to strategic globalization. As we navigate this new era, the question is not whether trade will continue, but under whose terms and to whose advantage. I'd like to make 6 points. First, you may all recall the establishment of WTO in January 1996. Painful exercise to bring all the members. It was meant to introduce enforceable trade commitments, and we all celebrated that. It was supposed to be backed by stronger dispute settlement system. I'll just fix it for you. With a stronger dispute settlement system and greater policy predictability. It was envisioned to be successor of GATT, serving as a major catalyst in global trade expansion and tariff reduction. The WTO has helped trade grow more than fourfold, from 10.9 trillion only to 49.7 trillion between 1996 to 2024. Moreover, global tariffs have also declined by 48% following WTO establishment, allowing for higher trade volumes and superior, qualitatively, cross-border integration. In 1996, the trade-weighted most favored nation tariff was 7.1%, which declined to 3.7% in 2021. The WTO's structure was key to export-driven industrialization, witnessed in numerous developing countries. In China, for instance, mercantile exports increased from 3.1 trillion in 2001 to over 3.5 trillion in 2024, cementing the country's position as the leading exporter of goods. Bangladesh and Vietnam capitalize on WTO framework like several other countries. As you know, Bangladesh ready-made garment sector expanded to $38 billion in 2024 and Vietnam to $495 billion in 2024. These countries diversified trade and value chains and nurtured FDI-friendly investment, maximizing WTO-related gains. Regrettably, my own country, Pakistan, has not been able to leverage WTO framework benefits. Export to GDP ratio declined from 16% in 1990 to 8% in 2025. Key factors contributing to this underperformance is reliance on low value-added textiles, energy shortages, logistics inefficiencies, and policy inconsistency. Historically, Pakistan trade regime has been amongst the most restrictive regionally and globally. Import tariffs and other discretionary and unpredictable para-tariffs, including customs duties and regulatory duties, made it expensive to import critical inputs and intermediate goods for enhancing quality and value addition. Over the past decade, the rising use of para-tariffs has pushed the average MFN tariff to nearly 20%, one of the highest among comparator countries. So good to hear that there will be a movement on this front. The rules are, however, being rewritten rapidly, globally and regionally. So we don't want to fall behind. The challenge for developing nations are to reorient and strategize themselves to withstand adversities by modernizing and reshaping to not just survive, but to launch aggressive reforms to enhance export value addition and diversification. Getting international trade regime going is critical as Pakistan needs to generate foreign exchange to settle its debt and FX liabilities. Second point, to reflect on shifting trade dynamics and the new age of trade war. Over the past decades, the United States has undergone a fundamental shift in trade policy, increasingly turning to tariffs and industrial strategies, not merely as economic tools, but as instruments of national security and strategic competition. The primary driver is China's rapid industrial ascent. Its fast transforming state-led model has enabled dominance in clean energy, electric vehicles, rare earth processing, and advanced manufacturing. China's growing trade surplus, backed by its rising technological and innovative edge, enhanced its productivity, competitiveness, and export-led growth with higher value addition. Originally, US was concerned about China's state-led subsidies, which were perceived as both economically distorting and strategically threatening. Now, of course, China is a bit more conservative on its subsidies because it wants to invest more in its capital in fresh areas. The third point I'd like to make is that events such as COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, which we heard this morning, have exposed vulnerabilities in United States supply chains, especially in defense, health, and energy sectors that depend heavily on Chinese production. A 2024 US government report revealed China as a top 3 supplier in 11 of the 15 critical defense technologies. A bit of this was alluded to in the morning in a different context. Consequently, US trade logic shifted from prioritizing low-cost efficiency to securing industrial resilience and geopolitical autonomy. Tariffs have transformed from now short-term protectionism into a deliberate industrial strategy. The US now imposes a baseline 10% tariff on all imports and up to 125% on Chinese goods. BlackRock, in one of the papers, notes that there are structural measures aimed at that these are policies that it has adopted are aimed at reindustrializing America and insulating its supply chains. Meanwhile, China has escalated its industrial push. It has, of course, subsidized clean tech, EVs, and advanced manufacturing, becoming the world's top auto exporter and reversing a $150 billion clean energy deficit. With 90% of global rare earths processed in China and dominance in key defense technologies, trade concerns are now deeply strategic. JP Morgan, in one of its papers, highlights that US defense systems' dependence on Chinese semiconductors elevates trade into national security territory. This rivalry is reshaping the global trade map. Emerging markets such as Vietnam, Mexico, and India have absorbed much displaced supply chains. However, their integration with Chinese inputs and growing US trade deficit make them potential tariff targets, as we know. Beyond the US and China, the European Union and Japan are recalibrating cautiously, balancing trade openness with strategic autonomy while multilateral systems weaken. Regional blocs such as RCEP and GCC Alliance and few others have, of course, grown, and the trade integration in these blocs is very high. We are entering a multipolar trade order, fractured yet brimming with opportunity, which Pakistan ought to take advantage of by getting rid of its internal domestic complexity of the policy regime. In short, trade dynamics are moving from globalization to strategic blocs. Let me make my fourth point, reflecting on Pakistan's strategic navigation. Amid the trade dynamic shifts, Pakistan stands at a pivotal crossroads. Rather than a bystander, Pakistan can be a pragmatic, flexible partner and opportunistic in the emerging trade order. With the United States, our largest export market, accounting for $5.5 billion, and a 3.4 billion trade surplus, we remain a small piece of the US import pie, equivalent to 0.16%, keeping us clear of tariff cross shares. This creates a window for us to expand into textile and IT. Recently, the press reported that most of the exporters that are in textile and IT business have decided to shut their offices and businesses. I think government should seriously resolve their issues. US tariffs on China, of course, open up a space for Pakistani goods in bed linens, pullovers, and digital services, among others. By offering Washington's supply chain diversification rather than one-sided concessions, Pakistan aligns with shared goals of resilience, digital connectivity, and regional stability. My fifth point is a different one. Strategic Defense and Investment Pact with Saudi Arabia marks a historic turning point, declaring that an attack on one is an attack on both elevates trust and new heights. Economically, it links Pakistan to Saudi Vision 2030, creating opportunities in energy, agriculture, logistics, and Gulf Africa connectivity. Saudi investment combined with corridor infrastructure can anchor Pakistan as a key Gulf supply chain node. Our enduring friendship with China, however, remains vital. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has vital infrastructure and energy foundation. The next phase must focus on export-driven growth, technology transfers, and attracting Chinese FDI into textile, electronics, and renewable energy manufacturing. At the same time, balancing Chinese partnership with US and Gulf ties is essential to avoid over-dependence and maintain strategic resilience. My last sixth point, none of these ambitions will succeed without reforms at home. Pakistan must build capacity through energy reliability, logistic upgrades, human capital development, and institutional strengthening. Pakistan needs to improve governance, regulatory predictability, and enforcing fair taxation while investing in vocational and STEM education will be equally critical. Capturing lost value, such as by halting export of raw cotton yarn and instead producing value-added textiles worth hundreds of millions annually, can boost Pakistan's outreach and competitiveness. So let me conclude. Colleagues, the global trade order is not merely evolving, it is being rewritten. For people who have read the economic history, and these were really critical subjects throughout my international career, whether I was at the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, or engaged with IMF, this was all being talked about. Tariffs, industrial policies, and strategic alliances are replacing the old orthodoxy and unfettered globalization. For Pakistan, this is not a storm to endure, but a tide to navigate with purpose and resolve. It is achievable. Most of all, by removing policy distortion and embarking export-led growth like ASEAN and other regions have done so. We must act with strategic clarity, deepen our trade and technology ties with United States, no matter how complex it is, leverage our historic pact with Saudi Arabia to unlock investment, logistics, integration, and defense cooperation, and strengthen our trusted partnership with China. Bulk of my career has been with China. As I was growing in the multilateral organizations, China was a principal country where I used to work. China means well for Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't move effectively to take advantage of the money that's flowing in. It has to build the institutional capacity and export competitiveness needed to thrive in a fragmented world. The global map is being redrawn, and Pakistan holds the geography partnerships, an ambition to emerge as a vital regional hub of trade, connectivity, and resilience. It is up to the leadership and policymakers to grab this opportunity. Whatever I have said is based on my international experience working in Asia, Middle East, North Africa, and virtually other continents. Within United Nations, there is so much goodwill for Pakistan. I know we heard that the Security Council doesn't work, but the development agenda, and I'm one of the architects of the Sustainable Development Goals internationally, we are lagging behind. As such, our poverty has grown, and we are not able to deliver on the climate and existential threat that Pakistan faces. I've done a massive report and disseminated it. We haven't taken the required action. Cross-border flows, we have no control over. With these words, I'd like to thank the organizers, IFPRI, for inviting me, and they had given me a specific subject, a very complicated one, but I hope I have been able to treat it well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. My next question to Zafar Masood sir. Sir, given your recent push for green and inclusive finance, how can Pakistan's financial sector drive resilience not just through buffers, but by financing greener, more competitive industries that can withstand external volatility and trade shocks?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think your question is too elaborate. To respond to this, I would need perhaps a lot of time, but I'll try and respond it very quickly. So first, to figure out the vulnerabilities, the external vulnerabilities, how would they potentially impact the Pakistani economy, and Pakistani, particularly the exporting sector. So the first and the foremost thing is obviously the exports. They remain, and this has been our dilemma for the longest time. I let my friend Mr. Durkin speak about the tariffs, the damage that the tariffs have done in terms of making us non-competitive on the export side. But that's the reality, and that keeps our exports much more vulnerable now than otherwise, because we're non-competitive to begin with. Second one is obviously the FDI, and the third one is the debt piece. We are largely dependent, especially when you're operating in a country which has massive external deficit. There is always a dependence on the foreign flows on the debt side too. Now, interestingly enough, all these three constituencies, Dr. Saab, the biggest opportunity is on the green financing side. There is funding available out there. There is no lack of funding as far as the green financing and climate compliance is concerned. There is lack of project availability and capacity, unfortunately. And the debt and equity, both pieces could be well taken care of at most competitive pricing for the most longer tenor possible in case of through green financing. The importance of climate compliance is very much appreciated by the large importers outside, especially the sector that Dr. Shamshad Akhtar also talked about, bed linen and garments. And the more sophisticated ones are quite keen on making sure that they'll get the imports from those exporters who are compliant on compliance and DEI standards. So therefore, if you are already complying with the green guidelines, you tend to get less vulnerable to the external shocks on the export side too. And irrespective of how volatile the economic or political situation may be, whether it's driven by the tariffs or otherwise, the green financing will remain a big opportunity to make sure that you keep yourself afloat. Let's figure out where Pakistan stands in terms of their ability to capitalize on these green funding opportunity, the climate compliance opportunity. On the export side, bed linen and garments, there are large exporters who are largely done well in terms of making compliance with the global green guidelines. And there is more out there, and I think with the emerging situation, these people will have an advantage over the others. But on the financing piece, and Dr. Saab, it seems like a rhetoric question directed towards me, the second part of your question, the financing one, I must say that we are not doing enough. The banks are not doing enough. Unfortunately, the government is not doing enough. We all have to work together to make sure that we'll capitalize on this opportunity which is out there. The primary reason why we have not been able to do well is because of the lack of bankable projects available. Green taxonomy is still not up and running. Blended finance is not embedded enough in the system that you would see some kind of benefits coming through. And the lack of coordination, ladies and gentlemen, between the provinces, the local governments, and the federal government is a big problem as well. By the way, this is not something which is peculiar to Pakistan. It is happening in 155 countries right now as per the recent UNDP report. Having said that, we have an opportunity here. There is the 27th amendment which is being done, and Mr. Saab, 28th amendment we're hearing will also be coming through at some point in time. My submission would be that we all must work towards making a proposition that this piece of coordination could be improved through that 28th amendment between the provinces and the federal government. Something massive could come out of on the economic front if we'll be able to skin this cat. The other one is the capacity building piece, Dr. Saab. And the capacity building piece, I would suggest that not just in this arena locally, but at the SARC level, because, climate has no borders. Therefore, we are all in the same situation as far as the climate vulnerabilities are concerned. And maybe at a SARC level, whether India wants to come through or not, we don't care. We don't need India, frankly. We can do it without India. Let's talk to Bangladesh. Let's talk to Nepal. They are also as badly hurt as we are. Let's work with them and take it forward as an agenda of the region. Lastly, Dr. Saab, just to connect this whole topic with the conference's main theme today, look, the future global order is in collaboration and cooperation. And the confrontation will only lead to global disorder in the future. Climate financing could be that binding force to bring all that order together, collaboration together. The agenda of climate is so gigantic, Dr. Saab, that it cannot be tackled by one or two or three parties. The collaboration is the name of the game, and it was fitting in really well with the topic today as well. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you very much. You summed up really well. And my next question to Dr. Stefan. You have recently engaged closely with Pakistan's economic team on industrial and economic reforms. Without breaching confidences, could you share the broad principles you believe are most critical for Pakistan's industrial policy to connect with its trade and tariff strategy, especially in such turbulent global environment?
Right. So as all your questions, they're very well constructed and slightly complex. Let me try to give a few points that, that begin to answer it without the totality. And it's, you know, other speakers have alluded to a few important things. And for me, let me summarize them, a few things in a slightly different way. Pakistan is a very remarkable economy. It doesn't trade. It doesn't buy and doesn't sell to the world. It's not just that it doesn't export. Its import levels are actually pretty low. As a share of GDP from trade, imports plus exports, it's amongst the lowest in Asia. Now, of course, it comes back to the problem that we describe. That percentage is about maybe 25%, where India would get at 40%, and typically, you know, Malaysia gets at 70% almost. It's remarkable that it's so low. Now, it is, of course, a reflection of other issues. There's also a related issue that Honorable Haroon Akhtar was also alluding to, is that this is an economy that should grow, but always gets in trouble whenever it grows. In fact, there is an empirical fact, an empirical regularity in the data on this country, that the moment you hit about 3.5 to 3.8% growth, you will have a balance of payments crisis. That's how you do 24 IMF programs. So if you basically have a structure of the economy that it's not that you don't grow, you cannot grow with this current structure. So this is always important to understand. You cannot grow. It's not that you don't grow, you cannot grow with this structure. So that's a cumulative process of, you know, Dr. Shumshat was essentially alluding to. Actually, uniquely in Asian context, you didn't take advantage of the biggest opportunity that clearly economies have had in recent times to catch up with other economies, which is called globalization, which is basically what more or less the rest of Asia all did, export orientation, catching up with it. No, you looked inward. So you have a cumulative process of distortion that gets to these percentages that you may have hit 16%, which, by the way, was not very high to any international standard. As export over GDP, you ended up below 10%. Okay? So it's really something that really needs to be understood. You know, there is something, lots of people talk about structural reforms, but often very vague. What do they mean? It's about the structure of the economy is wrong. It cannot grow with this structure. Okay. So yeah, that's, you know, I'm an economist. That means somehow there's something going wrong with the incentives set in this economy. The incentives, why capital and labor flows to, it flows to the wrong places. It flows to places that actually result to another phenomenon that you are very remarkable in the Asian context, which is a very low competitiveness growth. In the last few decades, your growth in competitiveness, in productivity, was 1/10 of Vietnam. Relative to India, it was 1/5 the productivity growth. Now, these things come together. How did all these other economies grow? By benchmarking themselves to what productivity level should we try to get, which is international benchmarking, which is outward orientation. And it creates the most dreadful incentives in an economy, which means that rather than maybe being in Lahore, in Karachi, running my business, it creates incentives to book my room in the Islamabad club forever. And basically saying, I am being protected now, but actually give me some more protection because I can continue doing this. And you don't benchmark yourself with what global competition is, what efficient allocations of capital and labor is, but you benchmark yourself in terms of what can I get away with, what kind of protection can I get, what kind of benefit exemptions, and so on that I can get. I'm afraid that is the Pakistani economy. That is what is being built up. And that's another way of saying that actually you didn't take advantage of opportunities that Dr. Shamshat describes, and that actually we now have lots of problems. Now, what do we do about it? Well, it has to be benchmarking yourself globally, which means you have to try to export and try to be competitive relative to others. If I want to give you one justification why you say bring down protection walls, tariff reform, it's actually to say learn to benchmark yourself to it, create incentives in the economy, not for one firm, and I will feel sorry for occasionally a firm that actually says, well, I was so protected, now I'm actually at risk, but actually to say, look, as the country as a whole, the economy as a whole, needs to change the structure and benchmarking itself to what a competitive economy should look like in the world, rather than just in the way I can manipulate it internally. Now, it's easy for me to say it, but actually, Honorable Haroon Akhtar, Honorable Minister, has correctly said, look, but all these distortions is not just that we've created capital that's allocated in the wrong sectors in the business, we've also allocated capital in the public sector not very well, and so on. So we have cost disadvantage of things that should be provided. We have tax rates that are high, not because we need the high tax rates we have, but because the taxes that are being levied are only paid by a fraction of the companies and the individuals that should pay it. So that's why they have to be high. Now, again, unraveling this is quite complicated, but I will tell you now why I have hope that actually this is still an economy with a lot of energy and a lot of vibrancy and a lot of potential. It's actually the very simple thing that however depressed we can be that actually we don't export that much, 1 in 10, 1 in 11 rupees in this economy is earned from selling to the world. If exports is 10% of GDP, means that 1 in 10 rupees earned in this economy is actually benchmarked relative to the world. Maybe not always with the most value-added products, too much yarn relative to certain other products, because that's responding to the incentives, but at least there are magicians in this economy. And my big appeal is that we should learn from these magicians that are still here, who, yes, they also have a cost disadvantage. Energy prices are high, tax rates are very high, but they still manage to do it within the formal sector. And I can assure you many of them are good taxpayers. There's some incredibly efficient exporters of garments and textiles in this economy that actually can compete globally. Now we should learn from them, and that actually leads a bit, okay, how do you then deal with policy? And now will be a little bit more controversial. Now you can ask yourself, should we protect the firms that are actually not very competitive and are really struggling with the high costs and the high things because they were never competitive? Or should we benchmark our support to the magicians in this economy who managed, despite all, the successful one? Okay? A Nobel Prize was given, shared between 3 people that worked around Schumpeter's ideas of creative destruction. And basically says, look, it's normal in an economy that certain firms will need to disappear and actually others reappear. Schumpeter things. And they basically worked it out. That's how the Industrial Revolution worked. That's how transformation worked. That's how structural change happens. So I'm not trying to say, and I'm not a heartless person that says, look, we need to look at firms that are struggling that potentially can be turned around and can be supported. But we should benchmark it very much in terms of industrial policy to those who are on the brink or already quite successful and give them what they need. And what does a successful firm need? It needs stability, in economic terms, in other terms as well. It needs predictability of tariff and tax policy. It needs basically a horizon that it can say, look, I can be working in this environment even today, but if you give me a bit more stability and structure, I can actually invest more and I can build further. So we should really think about, as principles, benchmarking ourselves in terms of, betting on success rather than trying to salvage failure. And yes, there will be adjustment. There is capital parked in the wrong places in an economy like this. There's things that actually need, and change is painful. This is also why I always suggest if we do tariff reform, don't do it in 1 year, do it in 5 years. People, even this morning I was talking to a journalist, said, oh, we should just do a shock. Why don't we do a shock? Well, I don't think shocks usually work. Even Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom took 10 years to do some of these reforms. That makes sense. Be patient, have to do it. But have a clear direction of travel, which is taking the words out of the mouth of Finance Minister, always talks about direction of travel, but be clear about it. Now, in this kind of global environment, to that final point of your thing, so first of all, there's 2 things remaining, One of the biggest problems in this economy and in this public sector as well is that we occasionally have very sensible thoughts and ideas, but they rarely get delivered. So just as we ask for patience on the business community and to see, do respond to the incentives, it has to be a focus on delivery and on implementation and very much transparency on all of it. And I think something you can agree. But it's an interesting thing. The turbulence that is being described gives sometimes people say, ooh, should we really engage with the global economy now and looking back? I think Dr. Shumshat alluded to it. The turbulence creates a moment where capital is on the move in the world. Capital in the world is on the move. You attract very little of it. This is actually your moment. It's in these moments of turbulence that the opportunity lies for the countries that have stayed behind in attracting it. And that's actually how you should think about it, is that actually this is the moment. The geese didn't really take off from China, flying west as we thought, but now actually with decoupling, they may need to do it. Value chains need to be secured. That means diversification of value chains. So there is opportunities where actually it gives an advantage to be late that it's not captured. But again, it needs to be careful delivery, transparency, and just predictability of the policy environment. And that's basically where I want to end. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. My next question to Harun Saab. You have talked about diversifying into marble and meat, but textile remains our comfort zone and our subsidy magnet. Can Pakistan afford to keep protecting textiles while trying to fund new industries, or are just adding new names to an old export story? Where do you draw the line?
You see, I'm in a position in which I can relate a lot that is being talked about to the ground reality. I'm not saying that, all the other speakers do not know the ground reality, but I myself am an industrialist, and I built from scratch 32 years ago. So I know what the Pakistani businessman goes through. Invariably, I see wherever I go, the countries tell us that the number one problem Pakistan has is the lack of stability. We've had good eras. We've had a good era of the 60s. We were doing very well, and we were doing much better than many other countries which are now world economic powers. But while the world started on a course of capitalist theory, we reversed our course and we went into Islamic socialism, and we nationalized our industry. Then in the 80s, we started to take off. In the 90s, we did some good things. We liberalized our economy for the first time. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif did that in 1990, and India followed us. But what happened? Our governments did not last for more than 2 to 3 years throughout that decade. So there was no stability of policy. Our industrial policy, which is going to be launched very soon, is the first industrial policy Pakistan is ever going to have. Policy is important because any investor who would like to invest in anything would like to see at least a 5-year horizon. Here, at every budget, most sectors and most industrialists are roaming around the FBR and the finance ministry and other ministry just to make sure that they're not going to be hit by something new, some additional tax and all that. How can you plan like that? How could you plan in which you do not have a long-term financing available? You do not have a development financial institution. If somebody planned to set up an industry 7 years ago, the policy rate was 6.75%. Then we went through a policy rate of 22%. Now it's down to 11%. Because the banks, I agree with Zafar Saab, absolutely. We have a serious problem with the private sector as far as access to credit is concerned. Because the banks find it very easy to invest risk-free in the government treasuries. And that is how the private sector is crowded out. So there are many things, and I feel and I am absolutely convinced that Pakistani industrialist or Pakistani businessman is no less than any other businessman in the world. They have survived through upheavals, they have survived through downturns, they have survived through terrorist attacks, and they keep bouncing up. So if a Pakistani investor shuts down his industry and leaves for another country, that means there's something really wrong that is happening, and it has consistently happened, and that is why he lost hope and he left. We've got to take care of that. And we are, with this new tariff policy and the industrial policy and the regulatory reforms and all that. We are taking care of that. In our industrial policy, we've taken care of the fact that the investigative agencies have intimidated our investors. Money finds a safe haven. Money doesn't like a fear of being lost. Money goes where money can be made with that money. That's the standard rule. Money doesn't come to any country because of the love of that country. It doesn't, no matter whatever anybody says. It comes for a return on investment. So we've got to provide that. So your question, if we have to go on a growth trajectory, it cannot happen. I absolutely agree with Stefan. It cannot happen in the current circumstances. And I really like what Stephen said, that I keep on hearing about this structural reforms, structural reforms. What are those? Nobody tells what the structural reforms are. We've gone through a macroeconomic stability reforms. We're going through an industrial policy. We're going through regulatory reform. We're going through a new tariff policy. Those are the structural reforms. So what people are trying to say is that we cannot grow within this structure of the economy, so it has to change. So that's very important, and we've got to keep on hammering on that, because structural reform has become elite capture, structural reform, consumption-led growth, rental income. You know, these are just written in the articles. Right. Ground reality is a little bit different. What about the elite capture in America? What about the number of billionaires in America and China and all that? What is that? Aren't they the elite? So we have to create elites. But with normal competition. We've got to create the wealth. We've got to create the billionaires, because they in turn invest in the economy. So if we have to change the structure of the economy, we've got to industrialize this country. We've got to gear our focus or incentives to the industries which will stand on their own and be competitive with the rest of the world, which will move towards a climate-friendly solution. That we have to take care of all that. We've got to lay the necessary infrastructure. We've got to have dams. We've got to have water storages. We've got to build an infrastructure. We do not even have a freight train. All over the world, the freight is a major cost of exports. Our freight through the roads is twice as much as the freight through the railroad. We've got to build all those things. We can't reach a growth model without without doing all these things. So the exports have to grow at a faster rate than the imports. Right now, imports grow at a much faster rate than the export. We also should consider that Pakistan's population is growing at a very high rate, and we need food for that. So we've got the agriculture sector has to move along with the economy, because if it does not, then we've got to import those commodities, and that is going to increase our import bill. And we cannot depend on the textile sector alone, which is about 55% of our export, but we cannot ignore it either.
True.
That is a golden egg that we have, a golden goose that lays the egg, is we have that. But as we grow, we've got to diversify in our exports, we've got to diversify in our markets. That's all said, that is correct. But we've got to focus on all those things that we are currently importing. We import almost a small pump from China. We can make jet fighters and we can make the bombs and everything, but we cannot make a pump or we cannot make an engine of a car. We've got to do that. We've got to move from light engineering to heavy engineering. We don't make boilers, we don't make turbines, we don't do that. And if you see, a big portion of our imports are either the energy imports,
True,
or the machinery, or the food imports now. So it has to go around that, and things have changed, I understand that. But South Korea in its initial stages also protected its nascent industry. China did that too. China, in some cases, gave subsidized electricity, subsidized land, and all those things. Once the industry was built, then they started on the competitive model. I'm not saying we must follow that. I agree with Professor Darkon, because things have changed, and we've got to adopt the changes, and we've got to move according to the way the world is moving, and we've got to go on to the artificial intelligence and all those things. But we've got to promote our exports. And nobody is going to come from the Mars or Venus and give us this export. It's our businessmen and our industrialists which are going to move on that path first. And once they start moving on the path, and once they start making money on that path, then the foreign investor is going to come in. So for the leather and sports, we do have a competitive advantage. We have a huge population of livestock. We have the raw materials of hides and skins available. So that's why we should promote that. There is a meat export market in the world. India is exporting billions of dollars. Why can't we? So we are encouraging that. So those things come in not at the cost of textile, but for diversifying our export. So it's a balanced approach. There are a lot of things that we need to do, but at the end of the day, it is the private sector which is going to make us prosperous, not the government. Government should act as a facilitator, make it as an investment haven. Let people take their decisions. There should be freedom of people to invest. There should be freedom of people to bring their money. We had two amnesty schemes. $25 billion was declared. Hardly $500 million has come to Pakistan. That's white money. Why doesn't it come to Pakistan? Because they're scared. They're scared of the institutions. We've got to remove that fear. And there's a lot of money floating in the system. Why are they undocumented? Because the taxation is too high. So that is the approach we have to do. We are doing many things. You just picked just a few things that we are doing, so I answered the question.
Thank you very much. Well, my question for Zafar Saab, since tariff disruptions often hit SMEs and farm-led, women-led businesses the hardest, how can our financial system evolve to protect and empower these vulnerable yet vital players in the export economy?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Before I respond to your question directly, a couple of things I would like to pick up from Minister Saab's last remarks. Uh, One is the fact that when Mr. Saab talk about elite, that's the business elite. There's intellectual elite also. The reforms come through the intellectual elites. Our problem is that our intellectual elites are also equally to be blamed for not doing their job. It's not just the business elites alone. Business elite, whether it's by are actually driven by the rent-seeking piece, is the one which is a concern. And in Pakistan, we are faced with that dilemma, where it's either by structure, like in the case of IPPs, or by as a consequence. In the case of banking, for example, we are in a state where the flourishing business are rent seekers, and business elites are not motivated to do things which are required to be done. And the intellectual elites are also not stepping up. The reforms come through when a lead bargain happens, as my friend Stephen Durkin argues in his book. And that bargain is missing. That bargain needs to be sorted out and encouraged. Dr. Saab, now coming to your question. While the consequences of the tariff are still to be figured out, we are not very clear how it will pan out eventually. But it seems like that there will be some kind of demand destruction, consumer demand destruction. And as the things are emerging, our competitive economies like Bangladesh and Vietnam, they are in the same bracket of tariffs as we are. So therefore, possibly having an advantage of us having a lower tariff in comparison to the others seems to be a far-fetched reality. So in all possibility, it seems like that there will be negative consequences. And if we do not put our act together, and we'll talk about how that could be done. And especially, on the exports and FDI side. FDI, we don't get much FDI in any case, so there's nothing to lose there as such. So blessing in disguise, in a way. On the other hand, on the export side, the high-end export goes to US, and that's where some kind of destruction is possible. Low-end products are likely to be less hurt in comparison to the others. SMEs are actually operating within that space of low quality exports. SMEs are, Dr. Anil, are fitting into this equation in two ways. One, as a direct exporter, is around 10%, and around 25% as part of the supply chain. So if I think that 10% will remain largely unhurt, but this 25% may get an impact. But then, the reality is that 40% of the GDP is SME, and it's predominantly, therefore, is domestic. So the vulnerability is not that substantial, at least in my very basic assessment, based on what seems like on the horizon. Having said that, we must be very clear that SME is a priority sector, and we give this the due importance that is necessary. I am taking the advantage of the presence of, Minister Saab here, who directly looks after the SME sector from the government side. I must compliment that last year the government has done quite well, and the banks have done well after a long break, where we've been accused of funding government a lot in terms of increasing our financing to SMEs. The SME financing increased by 41%, both in terms of amount and in terms of number of SMEs. The number of SMEs increased by 90,000 to now 276,000, and the amount increased by 201 billion rupees to now 693 billion rupees, which is a phenomenal growth. And this has all happened at the back of the government of Pakistan's program. And I must say, ladies and gentlemen, government of Punjab really deserves a round of applause here for doing a phenomenal job on SME financing. Look, Dr. Saab, I'm very clear on this. When you talk about priority sector globally, these are two global gurus of business and economy sitting here. They'll bear me on this. Nowhere in the world priority sector flourishes or operates without the government support.
Yep.
We should not shy away by demanding it. It's our right. We should ask the government that you should give the first loss guarantee, you should give the subsidy to this sector. Even today, by the way, if you go to the Department of Defense Energy Ministry of Defense Energy Department website of US, you'll see concessional financing there for which probably would have disappeared by now thanks to Mr. Trump, but it was definitely there. And in fact, Tesla was the product of that financing. They got that concessional financing. Why can't we demand this? This is our right. The government has to step up and make sure that for the SMEs, they remain, protected and supported without even being exposed to these tariff upheaval that we are witnessing globally.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stefan. The UK's post-Brexit experience shows the cost of trading so low. What lesson does that hold for developing countries that still rely on bilateralism rather than regional or global integration?
Well, well, definitely a lesson of what not to do. Look, it was always, and this is one of these issues. It was, I've seen from an economist, and I was at the time working as an economist inside the UK government. It was very hard to actually find ever an economist who would say, well, this will provide us with gains. Because we know that being part of broad multilateral arrangement as we were with Europe, that's a win-win. And not just win-win because the direct gains from trade that the economists in the room would have learned or maybe taught even in the basic textbooks, but actually also for the political economy incentives, where the politics, by benchmarking yourself with the rest of the world, you create incentives, you can show whether you're doing actually well or not, and you create incentives also that if you're being successful, you have a very measurable way of doing that, and it creates incentives to keep policies away from, the words were being dropped, elite capture, people that have endless access to get their own little deals within the system. Now, I'm not trying to say that's now the UK presently, but the current government, definitely the UK, is desperately looking for ways of reuniting it and tries to champion definitely multilateralism as well. And that's actually quite an important thing, that even in this age of turbulence, and I think actually Dr. Shamshat has implied it, yes, we know that the move from GATT to WTO brought a lot of benefits for a lot of places. And the fact that the Chinas of the world wanted to become members, that it was important for them to do so, was an important thing. Now, that's definitely in decline. But it is actually going to be important for anyone here to also begin in Pakistan to think about, what is that new version, whatever the acronym will be, but what will that globalization version 2 look like? That thinks about probably trading goods, probably even more so in services these days, probably movements of data, mobility of people, what that globalization version 2 could look like, that can make deals between already richer countries and with countries that are not as far, that are only emerging, what it would look like, and to actually begin to think about, what is an achievable thing? Now, why do I mention that? Because it's another form of thinking about benchmarking. I am very concerned and I'm not saying anything in practice here in terms of the Pakistan case, but all over the world, countries trying to do bilateral deals that they're unlikely to willing to do with the next country. Now that creates a mess that will take a long time to unwind. It's actually mean, in principle, whether it's to do with outward trade deals that you make, or actually, to be honest, domestic things as well, preferences you give to foreign direct investment, or indeed any preference you may ever give to a firm. The best criterion for it to judge whether it makes sense is that you're willing and able to give it also to the next firm, country, or investor that comes to you. And to have as a principle, can I keep on doing this? And I think I worry about this kind of world that the master of the art of the deal, or at least the self-proclaimed master of the art of the deal, seems to be going around the world trying to say that's how you do it. And we look at it and say, look, these are short-term seemingly gains, and then they have to be withdrawn from and it takes a lot of time to withdraw from it. So yeah, so I am a big fan of multilateralism. I'm conscious that we are going to have to move away and rethinking what that can look like globally in a globalization version 2, and doing it. But Pakistan should be champions of it, if only for the simple reason, it is the Asian economies that have gained most from the previous phase of globalization. Yes, consumers in the West, but it was much more, not without issues of inequality in some countries, even in Asia, but definitely it was far more broad-based, the gains that were made in, say, the Asian economies than anywhere else in the world. In the countries like the UK, the consumers gained, but it did affect workers and so on. But we need to begin to think about it, what that can look like. And so basically, any bilateral deal better thinks about it. Can this actually be the basis of subsequently do it with other countries as well? Because otherwise we're going to get ourselves in trouble and makes it much harder to step into the new emerging globalization version 2, which I doubt will be in the next few years, but it will be in a decade or so, and we'll better be ready for that.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have one round of questions, and kindly be concise with the question, and also let us know whom the question is directed, where we do have the mic. Dr. Durkin, till the mic reaches, I have one question from one of the youngest economists over here, Maisha, and she asks the question to you: doesn't differential treatment by the EU, such as the GSP Plus, impact Pakistan's competitive standing in global trade? Is it a fair model for an emerging economy like Pakistan?
And the question is, should we use that model, or is it unfair what I do to you?
Is it unfair?
To you? Look, I definitely, also when I was chief economist in DFID, and internally with our team, we were always promoting as liberal preferences that we could give to emerging economies. If you work in development like I do, and we see the benefits that we could have from it, and indeed, we were often concerned, also on the European side, that actually, these deals were already too transactional early on. And of course, we're getting more transactional in these deals. And I do think, I've always been a fan that definitely low-income country and some of the lower middle-income countries, they should be given some rope. Again, because the benefits, whether it's economically, but also politically, of having stable, growing economies to integrate with liberal democratic models globally, are so much stronger if you actually, and it should be incentivized, including by giving them rope and access to markets in the best possible way.
Thank you very much. And can anyone put the mic in the second row?
My name is Engineer Wasim Abbasi. My question to Harun Saab and Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. In order to ensure fair taxation to all sectors of economy, documentation of economy is very important. But in the Pakistani context, all the successive governments, whether political or military, they did not show any tangible progress on this front, whether due to political consideration or any other matter. This is the big dilemma due to which organized corporate sectors of economy are constantly complaining that we are overly taxed. So as a result, many corporate sectors are going from this economy. I think this is the main dilemma. What progress this government has taken right now and in future, what kind of planning they are doing for this documentation of economy?
Thank you. Can we take 3 set of questions and then we can address? My second question over there, the gentleman, please. Yes.
So my first question is to Sir Haroon.
There's only one question, not
Okay.
the first one.
I'll just resort to one question to Sir Haroon. So they say that, first of all, to introduce myself, I am a junior studying BS Economics. So my question is that they say that a budget shows the priorities of a nation. So in our budget, we see that consistently that no benefit is given to large-scale manufacturing, whereas real estate is given much benefit. Then PSDP funds are increasingly declining as well. So in this scenario, and there is also a lot of policy inconsistency. So we see that, first of all, they promoted solar panels, and now more tax has been imposed on solar panels. So that is an inconsistency. First, we moved towards renewables. Now we're moving back towards it because our grid cannot facilitate it. That is the rhetoric that has been given by the government. So in this era of policy uncertainty, I believe as a student that the private sector cannot sustain this. And our future as students who will go out into the job market and will want to be the entrepreneurial spirit of this nation, we cannot also sustain this policy inconsistency. It is your job to ensure that policy inconsistency. What has been the work done on that to ensure that? That is my question.
Thank you. And there's one at the last over there.
Dr. Anil. So my question is to Dr. Stephen. Yes. Why does the European Union tend not to operate on the realist principles in terms of the trade policies? When we see there's this trade wars globally. That's all. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? And a little bit louder.
Okay. So the question is, why does the European Union not operating on the realist principles in terms of the trade policies they are pursuing? Am I clear now?
No.
I'm not still clear. I'm just asking, when it comes to the trade policies, the European Union doesn't go for the realist principles. They go more for the cooperation.
Which principle?
Which principle?
Realist. The
Some
realist principle.
What is that principle?
Okay, I'm still not clear. Realist. R-E-A-L-I.
Realist principle. Okay. Thank you. Haroon sir.
Just a couple of things on taxation. We've got to keep in mind that according to the Constitution, federal government cannot tax agriculture income. So if agriculture income is 25% or agriculture is 25% of your GDP, then FBR is only taxing on 75% of the economy. That's the first thing. So if FBR's collection were around 11% of the GDP, then out of the GDP that they're allowed to tax, that will go up to about 13, 14%. That's the first thing. Secondly, you are not taxing on the service sector. The industrial sector constitutes over 60% of the tax revenues. And actually, it is only 18% of the GDP. So that is where the extra burden comes in. And it's not just the industrial sector that is paying income tax on it. It is collecting as a withholding agent many other taxes for the government. So FBR's performance is not as bad as it comes up in most of the, almost all the discussions, that their tax to GDP ratio is the worst in the world by being around 10.4%. It's not that bad. It's somewhere around 12, 13%. And if you take parts of the service sector in which the FBR should be taxing but hasn't gotten hold of that, like transportation, construction, and the traders and all that, that is another 25%. So virtually that's why you feel the weight on the 50% documented sector on which FBR is trying to extract the taxes. So imagine if FBR's ratio, tax to GDP, is around 10.4%, and they are taxing only 50% of the economy, then they are actually collecting 20% out of that 50%, which is very high, which is high. So wherever they are collecting the taxes from, they're doing well, but they are ruining that sector by putting on the weight of their collection on certain documented sectors. As you increase the taxes, the tendency to evade or dodge the taxes grows more and more. So either a documented sector will shut down its shop and start doing something else, or they will go undocumented. So it's counterproductive. And we've heard about the Leffler's curve. Stefan, I think, doesn't believe in that because he has a long story and practical experience. I've just seen it in the Reagan era in which they lowered the taxes and the tax revenues went up. But the theory still exists, and what I'm saying is that if we lower our taxes, I personally think we've crossed that point of Leffler's curve, the peak return of taxation. I think it has to come down. Not only are our corporate tax rates one of the highest in the region, but on top of that, we have this thing of super tax. So all inclusive, that combined with worker welfare fund and workers' profit participation fund and the intercompany dividends and dividends, I mean, sometimes we cross 60%. No business can survive in that. And the ones that are surviving will be tempted to go out where the tax rates are much less. I totally agree the budgets should be balanced. I think the budget has to start from a macroeconomic policy and then go down to revenues and collection. Right now, for the last many decades, it's the other way around. We start from the revenue, how much revenue we need to collect, and then we go above and try to make a policy out of that. I think Planning Commission has done a lot of good things, still doing a lot of things, but when it was formed in the 50s, it remained as the main economic policy makers of Pakistan. Somewhere down the road, Dr. Shamshad would know it much better than I would, that got disconnected with the real macroeconomic policy making of this country. So the budget does not really translate into the macroeconomic policy of the country. And it should. I think there's a lot of talk going on that. Why has the budget now been left down to PSDP, which almost invariably gets slashed at the end because of the shortage of the collection? That's a political decision. That was a political decision in which about 20 years back, we awarded through the National Financial Awards. In one go, we increased the share of the provinces from 45% to 57.5%. The federal government has become poorer. The provincial governments have become richer. They end up with huge surpluses. They are not yet used to spending money in the right ways. So this balance has to change. I know these are political questions and a lot of deliberation is taking place. If we cannot change the ratios, we should at least pass the burden of certain expenses, which are right now the federal government's responsibility, like the security, like the dams, like some of the infrastructures, like Benazir Income Support Program. That responsibility should be shared by the provinces. So there is some space available to the federal government to increase the PSDP and to have space to give the tax benefits, because now we are in a regressive tax regime. We are not gaining from this tax regime, we are losing. So we've got to get back on that. The third point is we have done very well in reducing the interest rates. They're still high, they're still highest in the region, but they have come down from 22%. This is the policy rate, mind you. The bank lending rate will be a little bit more than that, but we have come down to 11%. And because the federal government is the biggest borrower, the federal government has gotten the biggest benefit out of that. That's why our fiscal deficit has come down from over 8% to slightly above 5% this year. So we have that fiscal space available in order to give some tax benefits, but we cannot, because we are in a fund program, and our fund program looks at the primary surplus only, and which does not have the interest payments. So that benefited us when the fund program went into the fund, but it's hurting us now because we are reducing our fiscal deficit. It's helping us in containing the inflation, but it's not helping us in reducing the taxes. So those are the things. And renewable energy, was that your last question?
That was one of the comments.
Yeah, one of the comments. Yeah, about the solar cells. Yes. You see, Professor Durkan and Madam Shamshad Akhtar would know much more than that. Economics is not an exact science, it's an abstract science. You touch one indicator and then 10 others move. So that's why it becomes very complex. And that's why we have experts like Stephen Durkan and Dr. Shamshad in the business. It's a very complicated subject. So we gave this benefit for the rural area, for the households who could not afford these high energy bills. And there were hardly any taxes and zero custom duty for the import of solar. But it converted into a revolution. We have almost 4,000 megawatt capacity available on the solar. But what did it do? It moved the users, the consumers, from the grid to the solar thing. And the grid, which was already having a surplus electricity, is now more surplus. And what happens then? What happens then is that with the IPPs, where the payment is based on, if you don't buy the electricity, you have to pay them capacity charge. So the capacity charges go up. Once the capacity charges go up, then they have to be spread on a lower base. So it's really double jeopardy. That is why the IMF has approved the plan of selling excess or surplus power to those industries and those agriculture units which are using more electricity than what they did last year. So, and that's a 3-year program. So that is one of the major reliefs that has come in. And then we are also introducing wheeling, and there the charge will be less. So the government is the good thing is the government is fully aware of all this. When did we have experts like Stephen Durkan and more coming? Prime Minister is taking a keen interest in that. So it's not that the government doesn't know what the problems are. The government knows what the problems are. And once you diagnose properly, then you move towards the solution. And I am convinced that the amount of work and the in-depth thinking and the work that is being taken place in the Prime Minister's office, some solutions will start coming. We've gotten out of the worst period. I think good times and good things are going to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, I do. So I'm so tempted to give a comment on that, but for the simple reason is that, the things we have in the textbook, we would think of budgets start zero budgeting. We can start from scratch. The whole cumulative distortions that were just explained, that Minister Zapp was actually explaining, it is exactly right. You can try to do something, but it has consequences on other things, and you're actually sitting here in a series of trade-offs that none of them are perfect. So hopefully with further simplification, and that's part of it, creating more transparency so that actually the policy environment can become more transparent is actually one thing to do. But I got that, the international relations question, realist principles. I had to briefly remind myself what it was. But, the European Union is not following realist principles. It's true. Basically, that means it would do a trade policy entirely based on its own self-interest and its own advantage. So another way of putting it, it combines value-based things with economic interest in its judgment. And that's clearly, it's well established. Why does it do it? I don't know really. I live and work in Britain. It's not anymore part of the European Union. I'm a Belgian, sitting in Belgium as well. I wouldn't quite be fully clear exactly why they're doing it. But I just want to say something slightly different here, because the tone of the question suggests, it's making trade from Pakistan so much more difficult. For me, the answer is, if I go in Belgium in a shop, in a supermarket, I can find products from your eastern neighbor, from Bangladesh, from Malaysia, from Thailand, from virtually every African country, and I never find anything from Pakistan. And a lot of countries of that list are also quite complicated for all kinds of things that not necessarily, in the trade policies also towards them, not necessarily realistic, if I may put it like this. So the question is not, and I want to just make clear, Pakistan is not selling to Europe enough because they actually have this kind of mixture of trade objectives that making it hard. But I think it is simply, it's not exporting. It's not trying to be competitive and to do it. And so I'm not fully giving an answer there, but, a lot of other countries manage, despite all these kind of combined principles, to get very far in it. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Before we conclude, Dr. Shamshad, your comment?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I think taxation is a very favorite subject of mine. During the interim government, I had a plan for overhauling and really dismantling all the old practices within FBR. And it could take hours for me to explain to you the history of that 6 months. But, it's important to first get the diagnostics right. Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio has remained persistently low, averaging around 9.8% over the past 6 years. So, we have suffered a lot. With now fiscal year 2025 reporting 10.3. So it's creeped up. But if you were to ask me what is the potential in Pakistan of raising, of mobilizing, resource mobilization without raising tax rates, it's close to over 22%. So a lot is untapped, and there is scope for enhancing tax GDP ratio. Whether you look at the IMF or the World Bank reports, they are also talking about 15 to 20%. But I think there is enough evidence on 22% of GDP. In my view, at least my work that I had done indicates. Like other regional economies, Pakistan, of course, low GDP ratio is a reflection of systemic inefficiencies, FBR's policy and administration inertia, and a social contract that has frayed over time. It's not 1 year's problem. It is a legacy that we are living with, and we have to dismantle this legacy if we want Pakistan to grow at 7%. Because if you don't have resources, you cannot grow without that. I have to tell you what are these issues. We still have a very narrow tax base. 5.8 million individuals file tax returns, while population pressures are growing, it's exceeding 250 million, likely to reach 266 million now, according to the estimates. Second, there's a high informality, which is typical of the South Asian economies and developing countries. It's estimated to be over 60% of GDP. And of course, complexity of documentation makes it difficult also for FBR to tax. Third point is regressive tax structure. Unfortunately, there's a heavy reliance on sale and excise duties, means that the poor bear a higher relative tax burden than the rich. Yeah. There's fragmentation between federal and provincial authorities that erodes tax potential and its base. Of course, there is issue of limitations of data, etc. There's also distorted incentives, exemptions for influential sectors, and weak property valuation mechanism limit recourse for raising taxes.
Ma'am, can we?
And last point, a major share, as I said, of tax is collected at import stage. Now, as an economist, I would say this is a killer for the export orientation. You have to allow, I mean, I'm talking about Asia-wide experience. I used to live 15 years in Philippines and was Director General of the Asian Development Bank. So 15 years I grew in the system. Why is Philippines successful in diversifying and export growth? Simple. Imports are not taxed heavily. Taxes have to be neutral when you are using it into exports. I stop here.
Perfectly said. Thank you. Zafar Saab, you're the last man.
Very quickly, because there's a competition कि किसका ये ज़्यादा favorite subject है, मेरा या Dr. Shamshad Akhtar का या आप सबका. My board members are sitting here, IPRI के, they know कि मेरे कितने दिल के करीब है ये taxation का पूरा मामला because of three reasons. मैं जिस industry से मुंसलिक हूँ, that industry is the single largest tax contributor to this country, which is the banking industry. 1 trillion rupee this year. I am associated with the industry as chairman of OGDC, which is the second largest contributor to the taxation. And as an individual, I am the second largest contributor to the taxation. This is my most favorite subject than anybody else's. Let me claim this first. 52% of the GDP is contributing merely 3.6% of the taxation. How can this is a sustainable model? This is a completely insane model. And with all due respect to Minister Saab, the performance of FBR is dismal. I'm very sorry. It's shameful. I do not agree with this. They only collected money based on the rate. Nothing was done to make it broad-based. इस पे तालियां बजा दें ताकि कुछ तो support मिले यार.
I can.
The important thing is, जिस तरह अभी Dr. Shamshad Akhtar ने कहा, 22% potential है. If 22% of the taxes are collected judiciously, not by increasing the rate, banking industry is, जो banking industry owner है, they're paying more than 80% on their profit as taxes. Isn't this insane? I really don't understand it. There is a major issue. The real problem of this country is in the taxation policy, and FBR is to be blamed for it, not just because of the rate, but because of the intimidation that they do for the people who pay taxes as well. This is the problem, and we need to talk about it, we need to take it on, and we need to say what needs to be said. The reality, however, ladies and gentlemen, is this situation is emerging, changing very fast. With the technology emerging, these kind of things will not sustain very long. And the way the whole digitization paradigm shift is taking place. The crypto is coming through. Ambassador Sahab, aapko yaad hoga, in the last board meeting, I recommended a book called Sovereign Individual for the library of IPRI. I would strongly recommend for you to read this because that will give you a sense of where this world is moving. If we do not get our act together on the taxation policy, I am telling you right now, we will lose the steam altogether because these things will be very difficult to capture in a taxation environment. The way cryptos are emerging, the way stable coins are emerging, the way the digital currencies are emerging. And this is where I would recommend that, you know, the taxation piece must be talked about and addressed. FBR needs to step up. FBR needs to step aside from threatening people. FBR policy now being separated. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see that working either. Until unless we demand as individual that the taxation has to be fixed, I call it charter of society. Until unless we do that charter of society, I'm telling you right now, we will continue to lurk the wounds and continue to say that FBR has done very well by collecting 11% of the GDP in taxation based on the banking industry, individuals, and the oil and gas sector, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zafar Sahab. To conclude the session, Allama Iqbal, whose 148th birthday we celebrated 2 days back, once wrote that nations, like individuals, rise not by chance, but by discovering the strength within, what he called khudi, the power of selfhood. In the midst of today's tariff wars and trade turbulence, that idea feels timeless. For South and Central Asia, the question is not how to shield ourselves from global competition, but how to harness it to define our own destiny. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for patient listening and for the stellar panel. Thank you.
Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Dr. Stefan Durkin. Mr. Zafar Masood. Mr. Haroon Akhtar Khan. And finally, our moderator for the session, Dr. Anil Salman. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of today's proceedings. On behalf of IPRI, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all the distinguished guests and participants for their valuable contributions in trust and patience. Please join us for dinner served at the back of the hall. Thank you very much.